Please welcome the 110th mayor of the great city of New York, Mayor Eric Adams.
One of my favorite radio shows. Always good speaking with you, Zev. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. We're very honored that Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff joins us, a retired U.S. Naval Chaplain, former National Director of Interreligious Affairs for the American Jewish Committee. He's a former Special Assistant to the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force for Values and Visions. His naval career started in the rivers of Vietnam, followed by Naval Intelligence in Europe before his ordination. He helped create the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and convinced the U.S. military to participate in the US Days of Remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust. On October 23rd, 1983, he was present in Beirut, Lebanon during the terrible 1983 terrorist attack that took the lives of 241 American military personnel. His report of the attack and its aftermath, written at the request of the White House, was read as a keynote speech by President Ronald Reagan. And he's written a fascinating article regarding the newest ship in the Navy, which has a Jewish name and a rabbi's blessing. I believe it's the 10th ship that has a Jewish name. So, Rabbi Resnicoff, thank you for joining us.
It's my honor.
Thank you. So, first of all, tell us about how you got involved in the Navy. You've been there almost 3 decades.
Well, my father came from Russia 3 years old when my grandfather, a rabbi in Russia, escaped. And so my father grew up super patriotic. He didn't have a career in the military, but the day after Pearl Harbor, he quit his job and joined just for World War II. So I was the oldest of 3 boys, and he just raised me to think that at least one of us should pay our dues and serve one assignment in the military. So I joined ROTC in college, went straight to the rivers of Vietnam, never thinking I'd have more than one assignment. But it was in the rivers that the Christian chaplain, a circuit rider in Mekong Delta, appointed me Jewish lay leader for the ship. That means I'm his contact for Jewish questions, then Jewish lay leader for the whole Mekong Delta. And finally, he started nudging me, it's a good Jewish word, even though he was Christian, to think about being a rabbi. So I started corresponding with Jewish Theological Seminary. I had a few years left, obligated service, so that's when I went to Europe with Naval Intelligence. Got out, finished my obligation, went to seminary, came back as a chaplain, again thinking it would be one assignment, and stayed 25 more years as the chaplain.
Wow. What are some of the questions that you've gotten over the years when you were in the Navy? What are the most interesting ones?
Well, you know, I remember before the rules changed, and you now, partly because of something that happened to me in Beirut, it changed the law that you can wear kippot. When I first came in, it wasn't so clear. And I remember that when I was in Japan, my first chaplain assignment, a young sailor came in and said, "Rabbi, I'm not so religious, but I'm engaged to a religious girl and she wants me to cover my head." And he said, "I don't think the captain is going to let me." So I said, "Well, I'm not just a rabbi, I'm a chaplain, so I need to know the psychology of the military. Here's a multicolored, large yarmulke." It was even too big to even call it a kippah. I said, "When you go back to your ship and you take your official Navy hat off, put this on." And he said, "That's going to make it harder." And I said, "Trust me." So I got a call from the captain almost as soon as this young sailor got back, and I went to see him, and he said, "Chaplain, I believe in religious freedom, but this young sailor's not going to wear that beanie on my ship." And I said, "Well, what if I could convince him just to wear a little black one like I do?" And he said, "If you can do that, no problem." So there were so many questions. Could I do this? Could I do that? Until the regulations changed. Now we allow beards for religious reasons. We allow turbans for religious reasons. it all started with a story in Beirut. I don't know if you have time for that story or not.
So let's hear about the story of Beirut, sure.
Okay, so I was in Beirut for the terrible truck bomb attack, as you said. One interesting fact for your listeners is the only reason I was there was because I wouldn't travel on Shabbat. Saturday, I went Friday to lead a memorial service for a Jewish Marine who had been killed. Saturday, they wanted me to start my trip back to Italy, where I was stationed. And I said, I don't travel on Shabbat. I'll wait till tomorrow. And 6:22 in the morning on Sunday, October 23rd, was the terrible attack. As you said, 241 military personnel died, 220 Marines, 18 sailors, 3 soldiers. I always emphasize the sailors because almost all of them were our medics, what we call corpsmen. So not only did we have so many people dead, so many people wounded, but we had no corpsmen, no people to help. So we were literally tearing our clothes apart to wipe blood, wipe dirt. So I when the explosion happened, I was in my t-shirt and trousers. I was in the head brushing my teeth. So when we ran out, I had torn my t-shirt to shreds, used it just to wipe people's faces. Then I used my kippah, got bloody, got dirty. The Catholic chaplain, when we could take a breath, tore the inside of his camouflage cap off and put it on my head. He had put on a stole because he knew he had to give last rites. He was a Catholic chaplain. So he said, I want all the Marines here to remember, not just that we were 2 chaplains side by side, but that we were Jewish and Christian side by side in this country where every religion is gunning for every other religion. So 2 years in a row, there was something in Congress called the Religious Apparel Amendment, which was to be put onto the defense.
I think that was because of the Yama case that was brought by Nat Lewin, if my memory serves me correct.
Yeah, the court affirmed, that was the Yama case, that they affirmed the military had the right to say no, and Congress should change the law if they wanted to change it. So Lautenberg and Solars fought in Congress for this amendment that would specifically allow kippot. 2 years running, it had failed. And then in the congressional record, both in the Senate and in the House, they told the story of the kippah that the Catholic chaplain made for me and how it became a symbol, that we were united. The argument in the military was uniformity versus unity. If you have a yarmulke, it's not uniform, but on the other hand, we're united in terms of religious freedom and rights. So that Religious Apparel Amendment passed, and it led to a long line of regulation changes in the military called accommodation of religious practices in the military services. And then in 2020, for the first time, they changed the title to religious liberty in the religious services, in the military services. And so we've come a long, long way from that one question of a kippah.
Wow. So now you can wear a kippah in the military is no problem. Now, yes. Let me ask you this. Now, there's a new ship that's named the first time that a member of the Congress, a Jewish member of Congress, has a Navy ship named after him. I'm talking about the USS Carl M Levin. Now, you had a problem because the ceremony was supposed to be on Shabbat, on Shabbos. And so how'd you get around that? Because I know that it almost was an issue.
It was an issue. I didn't think I was going to be able to say yes. They had 2 parts. Friday night, there was a gala dinner at a hotel in Baltimore. That was no problem for me. And the shipyard was 3 miles away. Walking there on Shabbat, I said, was no problem. But there was a rule that once you went in the gate of the shipyard, you could not walk for safety and security concerns. You had to be in an official car or an official bus. And I said, I just can't do that. Yet. So that would mean I could be in the ceremony, but then the opposite would be true. I couldn't go to the hotel for the dinner. So the compromise was between the ship and the gate, there were some golf carts going back and forth for special reasons, carrying things. So there was a non-Jewish admiral on the commissioning ceremony, and he fought for me, and he said, we want Rabbi Resnicoff to do this, and he just cannot ride. So the compromise was that I would not ride in the golf cart, but it would be my escort. It would protect me. Evidently it was dangerous on the shipyard because of all the construction. So I walked to the shipyard, and then I walked next to the golf cart for that couple hundred yards final walk to the ship.
So you walked 3 miles to get there and 3 miles back.
Yes.
Wow.
Plus the few hundred yards, inside the shipyard. I think I looked at my iPhone app at the end, and it was like 8 miles round trip.
Wow. Our guest is certainly who's contributed a lot to our country. He is Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff, a retired US Navy Chaplain, former National Director of Interreligious Affairs of the American Jewish Committee. And we're looking at a new ship that's been named after a Jewish member of Congress, Jewish Navy. It's a Navy ship named after a Jewish member of Congress. Tell us, I think the USS Carl M Levin is it the 10th ship that's been named after a Jew? After a Jewish individual?
I'm pretty sure it's around 10. Most of the people before this were military personnel, Jewish military personnel. Admiral Rickover, there's a ship named after Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy. There's a ship's named after a number of Jews who died in the military, including 2, I think, that died at Pearl Harbor. A few others, but this is and the next one, there's already been a decision that there will be a ship named for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's a gigantic honor to have a ship named after you. So I don't think Carl M Levin ever anticipated this would happen.
So how does one get a ship named after them? What's the procedure? You said it's a big honor, and this is the 10th Jewish individual, as far as we know, that has a Navy ship named after them. What's the procedure like? How does one get chosen for it?
Well, different classes of ships have names. For instance, certain kinds of submarines are named after fish. Certain kinds of ships are named after towns. Certain kinds of ships are named after states. So there are not that many named after individuals. The states, the cities, really try very hard to get that honor. For an individual, they have to be people to recommend to the Navy that individual, and then there's a lot of study, there's a lot of questioning. So evidently, because Senator Levin was not only a senator for 36 years, if I think that number is right, he was also chairman of the Armed Forces Committee, so fought for all branches of the military. He took some stands against the leaders of the military. For instance, he was very adamant to try to overturn the don't ask, don't tell policy in the military, which allowed gays to serve only if they kept their identity secret. He thought that we were forcing them to lie and not to stand up straight and be proud. And eventually he won that fight. And at the presidential signing of the repeal, I had the honor of giving that prayer, which was one of the times I met him. So different people's names are put forward, and then it's a very, very long process before the decision is made. And you have to have a lot of people thinking that you're the right person for this gigantic honor.
Now, certainly a gigantic honor. Now, I was just curious, you mentioned about rights. Is it easy, or was it easy to be Jewish if you want to practice your religion in the Navy? I know up until a certain point in time, you had trouble wearing a yarmulke, wearing a beard. What about kosher food? And as far as you know, were there a lot of Jews in your time that served in the Navy?
Well, when I served in the Navy, at first, there were more because it was the time of the draft. Now, the Navy never drafted people, but because some people would rather serve in the Navy than in the Army, which was drafting, so there was a larger number of Jews, a larger percentage of Jews serving. I remember in Vietnam, I didn't go to the Seder in Saigon because I was in the rivers, but I remember there were hundreds of people at that Seder, and one of the Army Jewish chaplains led that. It's never easy being observant in the military, but it's much, much easier now. I remember when they finally passed that religious apparel amendment where you could wear a kippah, there was a catch-22. The first directive that the Navy put out said you could wear a kippah, but not during boot camp, and not during officer training. So in other words, if you believed you had to keep your head covered, you could do it as long as you figured out a way to get in the Navy without going through training. So we objected, and they changed that. So now, almost in every case, you can keep your head covered. If it's a matter of danger, where the helicopter rotors can blow something off your head, then of course you have to have a helmet on top of the kippah, which is good enough for us, of course. But I would say now it's much easier to get kosher food. It's much easier to get even kosher for Pesach food. It's much easier to keep Shabbat. And it's not just for Jews, it's for all religions. It's much, much easier to be observant. Not completely easy. And what the military says is that we will grant religious requests as often as possible given the military situation. So of course, you're not going to light Shabbos candles if you're on a plane, if you're in a jungle. But otherwise, absolutely you have that right, and you have the right not to work during Shabbat.
But during time that you were there, did you come across many observant individuals?
No. When I first came in the Navy, there were very few. And most of the ones who were observant were officers, and many of them were the doctors who came in. Now, more and more people are volunteering. And one of the big changes when they started to allow beards for religious reasons was that Chabad rabbis were able to come in. Before that, a lot of Chabad rabbis wanted to serve, but they were not willing to shave their beards. So we have a cross-section of Jewish rabbis now, including observant ones, that believe they have to have beards. So it's really changed. And I say now we have, when I first came in, there were only 3 kinds of chaplains: Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant. Now we have Muslim chaplains, we have Buddhist chaplains. There was 1 Hindu chaplain, probably will be more. So the possibilities of service, both as a chaplain and as a non-chaplain, has grown, and I think more people are interested in it.
Now, the chaplain, you have a Jewish chaplain, you don't have an Orthodox one, a conservative, Reform, Reconstruction. Is one chaplain supposed to service everybody, correct?
That's correct. One chaplain is, and not only Jews, a chaplain in the United States military, this is different than from some other countries have their chaplaincy. Some countries have chaplaincy, a Jewish chaplaincy, a Catholic chaplaincy, Protestant chaplaincy. We have an Army, a Navy, and an Air Force chaplaincy. And within that, at every level, every chaplain helps everyone. We say that there's 3 responsibilities of a chaplain. You minister to those of your own religion, so I'll always be a rabbi to Jews. You facilitate ministry to those of other religions. So I don't hold a Catholic service or a Protestant service, but depending on my level, it's my responsibility to make sure those services are held, that they have their prayer books, they have their prayer rugs, they have their rotaries, whatever they need. Just as the Protestant Catholic chaplain makes sure we have matzah, we have kosher wine. And then the third is you care for all, even those who claim no religion. In the United States military, the only person who has 100% confidentiality, privileged communication is the chaplain, more than the psychiatrist, more than the lawyer. So people know that they can come to a chaplain and it doesn't go on their record, and it's 100%. So people have come to me and said, tomorrow I'm going to run away. Or they've come to me when you're not allowed to be gay and say, I'm gay. They've come to me, to say, I'm using drugs. What can I do? So they trust the chaplain and they come to the chaplain. So a chaplain may not always hold a service. So for instance, an Orthodox chaplain may not want to hold a service where men and women sit together. So he may have one of the sailors or officers lead that service, but that Orthodox chaplain will be in charge and make sure the service happens.
You mentioned that they're atheists. I didn't know that there were any atheists in the foxhole. I thought everybody becomes religious in war or in combat or the Army or Navy.
I once got in trouble for quoting that old World War II line, there are no atheists in the foxhole, because that just meant that when the bombs are dropping, everybody prays. But today, there are proud groups of atheists who serve in the military, and they don't like that expression, so we don't use it anymore. So there are many people who are atheists who claim no religion. Some countries, some Scandinavian countries, even have chaplains that are atheists. You know, one of the Harvard University chaplains is atheist. He just sees himself as a counselor. But so far in the American military, we don't allow an atheist chaplain, but every chaplain needs to take care of a person, whether he or she claims to be atheist, agnostic, or whatever religion. We're a sounding board. We give advice. We comfort.
You know, they talk about the atheist hotline. You call the number, nobody answers. Our guest is Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff, retired US Navy Chaplain, who also was involved in military Naval Intelligence. 10 ships have been named for Jews, including the latest, which bears the name for Carl Levin, USS Carl Levin. It's the newest ship. So tell us about the fact that you have a ship named after you. It's an incredible honor. It takes years in the making. Now, the irony that you write in the article in the Times of Israel in 2007, Senator Carl Levin, has a Navy ship named after him now, visited the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman for a ceremony. Tell him about that ceremony. I guess he never even thought that one day he'd have a ship named after him.
I can't imagine that he would have thought that. He visited the USS Harry S. Truman because it was the first ship, an aircraft carrier, that was given a Holocaust Torah for the chapel. The ship was home ported in Norfolk and the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater, and my cousin is a retired Navy commander, was part of the effort to get that Torah scroll to the ship. And so they had a dedication ceremony. It was a Holocaust Torah rescued from the Holocaust, and so it couldn't be used, but it was a symbol of religion, for the ship. And so they gratefully accepted, and then Senator Levin participated in the ceremony. As you said, that was 2007. I can't imagine when he went to a ship named after President Truman that he ever would have dreamed one day there'd be a ship named after him. One of the nice things about the ceremony, a ship always has sponsors, and he has 3 daughters, and they were the sponsors of the ship. So the last words in the ceremony, his 3 daughters looked out over the ship at the crowd below and said, "Officers and crew, man the ship and bring her to life." And hundreds of officers and sailors in whites, sparkling whites, ran in a line, but they literally ran up the ladders of the ship to all the decks, and that's when the Secretary of the Navy announced the ship is now part of the United States Navy.
A wonderful ceremony. Now, you mentioned the dedication of a Torah. How many Torahs are there in the Navy or the Army? I'd be curious to know.
Well, on bases, at large bases on land, I don't know a specific number, but I would say, just a wild guess, I would say 15 or 20. But on ships, very, very few. A lot of times on a ship, it's hard to get a minyan, so you wouldn't read directly from the Torah, but still this was symbolic, a very large ceremony for the Truman. It was symbolic. It was a recognition of the importance of Judaism on board that carrier.
Now, you say the Torah, was it a kosher Torah or wasn't a kosher Torah? I was trying to get a handle on what you said before.
Yeah, I don't think it was a kosher Torah. I think it was rescued from the Holocaust, and then it was put in a glass case in the chapel, just as a symbol that Judaism would continue, that nothing, the Holocaust didn't wipe us out, and nobody would wipe us out, and this ship would be part of the American military's defense of our rights and our freedoms, including religion.
Any reason why they didn't make it kosher or kept it the way it was? Because it would have even more symbolism, I guess, if it was a Torah that could be used.
I'm going to have to go back and do some research. I could be wrong. It might be that it's kosher. So I will check. As I say, I have a cousin who is a retired military officer who was involved in that ceremony, so he would know. I will find out and email you.
Okay, I'll be just curious about that. And I would assume that the Torahs that are in the bases are kosher, that it could be used for a minyan when
Yes,
such minyan.
that's
Now-
correct, including one in the Pentagon. You know, the Pentagon never had a chapel before 9/11. If a rabbi visited for a ceremony, for a holy day, they would use a classroom. But 9/11, where the plane hit the building, you know, the plane hit the grass first. That's where we have the 9/11 memorial, and bounced into the building. Where it hit the building, they built a chapel. And although I was not part of the dedication, I was part of the dedication of a Sefer Torah when it was donated to that chapel. And I remember speaking and saying, the Pentagon has 5 walls and 5 floors. Now we have a Sefer Torah with the 5 books of Moses. And so there's a kosher Torah, and they do use it when they have a service with the minyan.
And how does it work? Is the Army or Navy commission it? Did somebody just donate it? How does the process work to determine that they get a Sefer Torah at different bases? Usually
it's lent by a community. I know, for instance, for the Harry S. Truman, the Jewish Federation of Tidewater lent it for the time that the ship would remain commissioned. At that point, they estimated the brand new aircraft carrier would last for 41 years. So I think that almost in every case, I think the Torah is on loan to the base. Now that it's locked up, but I know in the Pentagon they had a very special ark, you know, that was securely locked, so the Torah, you know, is protected, and a chaplain has to be in charge of the decision to take the Torah out to use for a service.
So in other words, they really secure it and making sure that it's a safer Torah.
Safer Torah, absolutely.
And nothing slips by you. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining us, Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff, a retired United States Navy Chaplain, been in service to our country for over 30 years. He was there in Lebanon when the barracks were bombed and U.S. servicemen lost their lives, and 241 American military servicemen lost their lives. And he's been involved for so many years. And thank you for your service to our country.
I thank you. It was an honor to speak with you.
When is the book coming out?
I'm working on one.
Okay. And my final question is, if the book comes out and they make a movie out about it, which movie actor would you like to portray you?
That's a very hard question. I don't think I can answer that. I have my daughter at choose.
Okay. Anyway, thank you for joining and continued success.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Terrific. Thank you.